I would like to jump into our next panel. So this panel is called Riding the Waves, the Tsunami of Electrification. And what we decided to focus on today, it's not just on the tsunami of electrification, but what is the impact of COVID-19 on this tsunami? Is it a rock that the wave has to overlap, or is it something that potentially becomes an accelerator because so many disruptive points we have encountered so far? Supply chains have been affected. We have seen real effect of pollution reduction, what transportation can do if it becomes electrified. Many factors to consider. And today, I don't know if we have a crystal ball, but we will try to get to it as close as possible. And with that, I would like to introduce all of our panelists. And we'll do the same thing. I will ask each one of our panelists to essentially say not only what they do today, not only what they work on, but also what brought them to working in the area of clean transportation, clean energy, cleaner world, if you will. So please join me here, all of our panelists, enable your cameras and microphones, and let's start with the introductions. And I suggest we go exactly in the order that is given on the screen right now. So it'll be Erica, Rustam, Bob, Cliff, John, and Dan. So Erica, you go first.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having me here today. I'm with the Smart Electric Power Alliance. I'm the principal of transportation electrification. And what brought me into the clean transportation field? I've been working in clean energy and clean transportation for about 16 years. The reason I'm in this field is, first of all, energy is probably the most exciting industry. It's constantly evolving. There's so many new things and trends going on all the time. And so that really captivated my attention, but also the broader issue of climate change and how we can reduce our impact of carbon emissions through things that we depend on every single day. Energy is the lifeblood of our economy, so how can we clean that up?
Thank you very much, Erica. Rustam?
Hi, good morning. My name is Rustam Kocher. I'm with Daimler Trucks North America, working on infrastructure and single point of contact with utilities. Happy to be here today. I fell in love with electric vehicles back in 2009. I had an old Nissan Altima that I wanted to get rid of and was looking for an electric vehicle, and the only thing I could get was a three-wheeled tin can called a Zebra, and been following it ever since.
Thank you. That's great. Bob?
Hi, everyone. My name is Bob Stoyanovich. I'm responsible for EV charging infrastructure solutions in North America for ABB. I've been with ABB about going on 21 years, and it's been an evolution for me. I was born and raised in Canada, across the river from Detroit, Michigan, a town called Windsor, Ontario. So I've always been in the automotive mindset. I mean, that's all they think about there as a feeder to the big three at the time. That said, I moved to California probably 1990, got with ABB in 1999. Progressively exposed to green technology, starting with wind and then solar, then microgrids, and then EV infrastructure came up. And as a car person, I'm pretty excited about the fact that you can get much better performance out of an electric vehicle with way less noise. And obviously the environmental benefits are huge. So to me, it's just a nice circle coming back to vehicles.
Excellent, thank you. Cliff?
Yeah, my name is Cliff Fitzek, Director Technology at Electrify America, and my life and my work with EV started in 2009 when BMW decided to electrify an electric Mini, which no one really thought this is ever going to take off, and what will that be? And then out of that, moving into all of the electrification which BMW did at the time. And then getting more and more involved into infrastructure and how to accelerate the EV market. And now living that dream in Electrify America with having the means to electrify America. And now lately seeing an electric Mini coming back really brought a lot of memories back, and what has happened over the last 10, 12 years there, which is astonishing.
Thank you, Cliff. John?
Yeah, I built my career in innovation and transformation on the electricity side with smart grid way back about almost 20 years ago. and then on DER, integration, decentralized energy. And like Erica, I've been very focused on climate change. I've got a couple kids in their 20s. And so for really the last 10 years or so, I've been very focused on how to make things go faster. About a year ago, give or take, I was invited down to Australia and took a contract with Tritium. And that's really been my introduction to the transportation side. I think integrating transportation, the vehicle to grid integration we talk about, is part of this continuum from smart grid to decentralized energy integration to microgrids. And so it's been a great ride. I've met a lot of people in this sector, and now I'm transitioning out of Tritium and launching a new consulting firm called Tetra Innovations Group, where we'll really be focused on transformation and innovation.
Thank you, John. And do we have Dan on the line with us?
Hi, everybody. I'm here. It's Dan Bowermaster from EPRI. It looks like the system has a max amount of webcams, so I'll just talk. So I've been working on, here we go. All righty. Morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you're at. I'm Dan Bowermaster from EPRI. I've been working on EVs for nearly a decade now. I love cars, trucks, anything that pretty much goes. So this is a great situation to be in, to be part of the broader community. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Once again, thank you, panelists, for joining us. And with that, I would like to start our presentations. So the format will be very simple. Each panelist will have a very short presentation. I would say, please stick with around 7 minutes since we're running a little bit late. And after that, we'll try to have as much of Q&A session as possible. So we're starting with Erica. Erica, the microphone is yours.
Great, thank you so much. So go to the next slide, please. For those of you who may not know the Smart Electric Power Alliance, we are a 501c3 based in Washington, D.C. Sorry, next slide. We are not an advocacy organization, so we don't lobby for particular regulations or policies. Instead, we focus on research, education, collaboration, and standards. So we see ourselves more as a neutral facilitator around the topics related to clean energy. Next slide, please. Yeah, I wanted to just macro picture here of what's going on with COVID-19. You know, it's been a really difficult situation for so many countries, so many people around our globe, and it's been, you know, kind of one of these things that we'll talk about for the rest of our lives, being involved in and living through a pandemic. And the situation seems pretty dire for most people right now. With the upcoming economic crisis, things get even more difficult for families and folks as they struggle without jobs and without access to particular, you know, day-to-day needs. Like for me, childcare is one of those. But those things seem pretty small in the grand scheme of climate change. Something to think about here is just like the virus doesn't really have any discrimination about who it targets. Similarly, climate change will affect all of us equally. Some of folks would be able to potentially buy their way out of some of the bigger impacts, but I think all of us will struggle with things like food shortages, economic impacts, sea level rise, acidification of oceans, the impacts of the weather that is expected to become even more intense than what we've been seeing around the globe. So I think, you know, from that picture, climate change certainly must be on the forefront of our minds as we plan ahead. Next slide. So one thing that our organization does is we work with electric utilities from around the country. We have 1,100 members that we work with, 750 of which are electric utilities. And we have been documenting all of the utility decarbonization commitments for the last year or so through our utility decarbonization tracker, which you can identify and find on our website at cpapower.org. 65% of customer accounts in the United States are served by a utility who has a carbon emission reduction goal, and this number continues to grow. So we continue to see these major utility commitments almost on a weekly basis now. And we are just now launching our very first utility transformation challenge, which is a huge utility survey that we've launched to see what utilities are doing and their strategies around decarbonization. And one of those modules by which we're identifying the scale and impact of these decarbonization commitments is through transportation electrification. So a lot of utilities talk about beneficial electrification as one of the strategies by which they're planning to decarbonize the energy that they provide within their service territories. But within beneficial electrification, many studies have shown that transportation electrification is probably one of the largest opportunities. NREL, for example, is estimated to be roughly 50 to 65%, if not more, of the total beneficial electrification opportunity. So within that, we've focused a lot at SEPA on this topic. We have a lot of interest from our members about this issue, and certainly it's something that we continue to monitor as it relates to these decarbonization commitments. Next slide. So within decarbonization commitments, we certainly see vehicle grid integration as a huge opportunity. There's two main things that we think about when we think about the opportunity for VGI. The first is retaining the value of renewable energy. So as everybody on this call knows, solar and wind are intermittent sources of power, and as we get more and more of them on our grid, we'll see some collision of when people actually need the power and when there's demand, when there's actual production. So the supply demand is not necessarily always aligned. We're starting to see some of these trends in the springtime, for example, in California. And so we're trying to think of ways that we can continue to enhance and retain the value of renewable energy. And a lot of people talk about stationary storage as a means to do that. But why not take advantage of mobile storage with electric vehicles, especially if we think about the fact consumers are buying these. Maybe there would be at some point in the future a cheaper way to provide storage, aggregated storage through things like mobile batteries. The second thing we think about is minimizing on-peak charging. And on-peak charging is only actually going to exacerbate potential issues with as it relates to decarbonization, because typically during on-peak is when you have some of your dirtier fuels that are being used to supplement energy production. So how can we use VGI to minimize on-peak charging that would actually kind of negate some of the goals of electrification in the first place? So as you can see from this chart, we've created this bridge example of benefits that you might see from left to right. So where a utility is on this bridge may be dependent on the number of vehicles they have in their service territory, what sort of grid impacts they're already experiencing, and maybe how it might align with some of their bigger decarbonization targets. So if you have fewer electric vehicles in your service territory and very few issues with on-peak charging, maybe a passive approach through things like just critical peak notifications like a text message, or maybe you have an electric vehicle rate, that would be sufficient on this VGI bridge. But maybe later on down the road, when you have a higher penetration of vehicles, you want to get more grid services out of those vehicles, you want to incent your consumers to participate in programs, then maybe of active VGI, like a managed charging program or vehicle to grid program, would be more aligned with what your needs are at that point. So we see it as a spectrum. There are customer benefits that can be derived as well as distribution utility or bulk power operator benefits. And so certainly these are things that SEPA has been working towards. Next slide. So I'll finally stop here with this chart that I saw from Proterra last week during one of SEPA's electric vehicle working group meetings, essentially correlating the infection rate curve with flattening the load from charge management solutions. In this particular instance on the right is fleet charging energy curves, but you could also use that same sort of chart with on-peak charging. So I thought that was an interesting correlation and certainly something that is very timely for the situation that we're in today. And I would just mention real quick, for those of you who may not be familiar with SEPA's Electric Vehicle Working Group, this is something that is available to SEPA members. And if you're not sure if you're a SEPA member, you can go to our website and check it out. We have a full list there of all of our members. These are enterprise-wide, so you may or may not know that you're a member, and you can get access to all those member benefits associated with that. We have roughly 550 individual members right now. We meet monthly, and we also have 4 subcommittees on different topics, including managed charging, EV rates, another one, a distribution planning for EVs, and finally, a new subcommittee on fleet electrification. So I'll stop there.
Well, thank you very much, Erica. Great presentation. And now I would like to welcome Rustam.
Good morning or afternoon, wherever you happen to be. Thank you to Erica for the presentation, and I hope to tie some of these topics together as well as with Commissioner Monahan's topics as well. So I'm here to give a quick update on a CharIN topic, high power charging for commercial vehicles, or what we call HPCCV. It's been referenced a couple times in the videos that Oleg has shown. Next slide, please. I'm actually the task force lead for HPCCV. We started March 18th at one of the first annual meetings of CharIN held down in California. And we focused on consumer or customer flexibility. That was our main touch point. We've come back to that over and over again as we design and develop the requirements for this plug and the standard. We want to make sure that it addresses customer needs first above all else. So we've gone through a number of different processes where we developed requirements. We aggregated those requirements. We called for contributions. And now, next slide, please. And we built this group to generate as much momentum as we possibly could. And it was because current DC charging standards just don't provide enough power for what we would call a quick charge of commercial trucks and other commercial vehicles. If we're talking a commercial vehicle that's going to have 500, 600, 700, maybe more kilowatt hours on board, and we want a 20-minute charge time, we quickly outpace anything that the current DC charging standards can provide to the vehicles. So again, if we look at this from a customer perspective, and they're going to purchase a very expensive commercial vehicle that has a single purpose, which is to make them money, total cost of ownership, then they want that vehicle to be running as often as possible and sitting and charging for as little time as possible. And in order to do that, we have to have some medium and tool to be able to charge it quickly. So we set out to build, as I said, a consortium, a group that had a lot of momentum behind it. Next slide, please. And we achieved that. We have over 80 members on the task force today. And we built it in such a way that we could see all the different parts of the elephant. If you think back to the old fable about the blind men and the elephant, the fable is that 5 blind men enter a room and they're asked to describe what they're touching, and they all describe something very different. One of them is touching something very hard and pointy, one is touching something bushy, one is touching something rough, and they're all describing the same thing. It's the elephant, but they're all describing it from a different point of view. So we wanted to make sure as we tackled this that we had all the different points of view at the table and able to contribute. So it wasn't just the OEMs, it wasn't just the equipment suppliers or the EVSC manufacturers or the network providers. It was including customers, it was including service providers, as well as the experts from the government labs and from the utilities as well. And we found that this group has worked really well together. Everyone has come to the table eager to share and contribute. And we've gotten a lot done since we started. Next slide, please. So as we talked about, we did come up with a requirements list. We are trying to define a single conductive plug that is human operated and capable of being automated. Maximum of 1,500 volts DC or 3,000 amps DC and 3,000 amps DC using PLC or ISO 15118 communication. That's touch safe to UL 2251, has on-handle software interpreted override switch in order to stop a charging sequence, adheres to OSHA and ADA or the local equivalent standards, FCC Class 8 EMI and local equivalent, and located on the left side of the truck, roughly hip height. UL certified, cybersecure, and V2X or bidirectional capable to the points that have been brought up. When you have a battery that large in a commercial vehicle, it's very important that it be usable in a V2X style situation where it can support emergency vehicles, support emergency place where people have gathered after an earthquake, for instance, or just is able to soak up sun during the duck curve. So we have, as I said, solicited submissions to meet these requirements. Next slide, please. We have selected a design, and we're in the iterative process now of going through and validating that this design performs the way that we have set these requirements out. So the CEC, thank you very much to Patty Monahan and Commissioner Monahan for the funding. We are holding a testing event at NREL. It was originally scheduled for May 22nd. Due to the COVID event, we've now pushed it out till late September. But we hope to convene at the National Renewable Energy Labs in Golden, Colorado, and bring prototypes and test both powered and unpowered connections for the connector and the inlet, and make sure that our direction and the design is correct and can perform as intended. The ultimate goal of the task force is to complete requirements and specifications document, including the plug geometry, and have that complete by the end of this year. COVID-19 hopefully won't delay that timeline too significantly, but it is anticipated that it's possible. And I believe that's the end of my presentation. Looking forward to questions later. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, Rustam. Great presentation. Next one is Bob.
I'm back. All right. Hi, everyone. So we can get into my presentation here, which is a view of, or a possible visionary view of the future from a technology standpoint. As you know, ABB is a technology company. We can move into the next slide for that. So ABB, generally speaking, has a lot of experience globally in EV charging. We've got over 13,000 units in over 80 countries. We've been in the EV charging business for a little longer than 10 years. There's approximately 500 full-time employees dedicated to this business segment. And you can see on the map on the right just an idea of where we're located from a production standpoint. Next slide, please. So in order to have this discussion, there's a couple of base facts that we wanted to deal with in order to kind of set this up. So one is that transportation emissions accounted for 24% of global CO2 emissions. We have a steady rise in population. So between 2000 and 2017, we added 1.4 billion people. And then the trends are increasing, right? So emissions continue to increase in that same time frame. So one of the solutions to deal with the CO2 emission issue is to try to electrify in a smart way, and that's the premise. Electrification on its own is not necessarily carbon reduction, so it depends on the sources and the management. Next slide, please. So in that effort, ABB has spent a significant amount of money trying to pioneer best practices and show that the technology is capable of doing some pretty amazing things, and Formula E is a good platform for that. So as the title sponsor, we're in that for, I think, another 4 or 5 years, and it's a great showcase for what the technology can do from a performance standpoint. So there's no trade-offs there. Next slide, please. So what it's going to take to get to zero emissions, and I think the previous panelists have done a pretty good job, but I think the key point here is that vehicles, and since we're in North America right now, this is kind of a key point, is that vehicle availability is key. Selection, consumers are a fickle bunch, and I know that the commercial and heavy duty is also waiting for more vehicles to become available. We need to be able to charge the vehicle, so that's the business that ABB is in. Then we need to be able to reinforce the grid possibly. Again, that's a business that ABB is in. And then, of course, integrating renewable power and optimizing that is a key to achieving those goals. Next slide, please. So there's a couple different views on what charging infrastructure looks like. By no means is this necessarily the only one, but this is the current type of gas station setup that you would see. And the key point here is it's a little different than a gas station, and there's no big gas tank there, right? You're plugged into the grid live. So how do you do something at scale without stressing the grid? Well, I think some of the answers are adding on-site generation, on-site storage, and then of course smart management. Next slide, please. There's some automation in place here. So we're just highlighting a couple pieces of the infrastructure here. So there's power distribution equipment, chargers, and local generation. Same concept, but more in a shopping mall. So you can tap the advanced button. There's different ways to get to scale. So pre-fabrication, plug and play EV infrastructure is one concept to reduce costs, increase reliability on commissioning, and reduce field labor. So if you can assemble it somewhere else, test it, and drop it on site and plug it in, it should reduce issues in the field and increase uptime. So a modular approach to deployment that can be scaled and not have to be built on site. Next slide, please. And this is an automation of a bus depot, and this is one other way to look at how do you maximize or optimize your assets in order to get best utilization. So I mean, you can buy one charger per bus, or you can get a limited number of chargers and use them in a fashion that is suitable to achieve your purpose. In this case, what we're doing is we're charging, we're doing sequential charging on an overnight depot. So you schedule it so that the bus in the front gets a full charge, and then you move to the next one, give it a full charge, and then the one behind that. And the point here is that you're still using only one charger instead of 3 chargers, but you're using it in a more efficient fashion. Otherwise, you would need a bunch of chargers to do it in parallel. The same thing can be brought in across the scale of the entire fleet. So you schedule the first units to go first, and so on and so forth. So the point here is that you can go through the Braun approach, or you can go through the more brilliant approach, which is to be efficient with your assets and think about how you're going to increase uptime, optimization of and high utilization of assets in order to drive the cost of infrastructure down. And with that, there's a lot of intelligence that needs to be applied. You can advance. One other consideration that needs to be brought into the smart charging world is making sure that you don't exceed your grid connection. So intelligence needs to be applied there. Given the way that things are sited, you can, in theory, put more load on a grid connection than the grid connection can handle. So if you don't intelligently manage those assets, you can find yourself out of power, which nobody wants to be done. So the intelligent platforms are out there, whether it's cloud connected or site controllers. You incorporate storage and local generation, and you can do some pretty amazing things with a limited amount of power. Getting into the vision of the future, this is a graphical display of what we think is a complex situation, right? So you can have a bunch of different vehicles charging off of one main charger with all different schedules and different ranges and different charge rates. So rather than have one charger per vehicle, it's nice to have one charger completely optimized for the route planning and the capacity of the vehicles. So this is, of course, technically possible. What's interesting is that as vehicles can take higher speed charges and in longer range, taking economics into play, it can become quite a complex algorithm. So with that, I'm wrapping up here just to show that charging is not just about the vehicle or the charger, but it's everything from the grid to the actual vehicle, and considering the routes as well as the capacity and the charge rates of what you want to do. With that, I'm wrapping up my section. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for your great presentation, Bob. And the next one is Cliff. Cliff, welcome. The microphone is yours.
Yep, thanks for having me, and thanks, Eric, for hosting, even if it's only virtual. Let's advance one more slide. So I will explain a bit about the feedback or about Electrify America. All of our colors are off here. Electrify America and how we see the charging infrastructure today and then in the future. For everyone who doesn't know where Electrify America is and how it started, so Electrify America is a $2 billion in investment. We are spending every 30 months around $500 million. The $500 million each cycle are split up in awareness, infrastructure, and green cities. This is all, the goal for that is to enhance the self-adoption and accelerate self-adoption over a 10-year period. We already are through our first cycle and in the middle of our second cycle, and I will mainly focus now on the charging technology, the infrastructure along the highways and the metros. Please go to the next slide. So we are installing in the first two cycles over 800 stations across the US. We are in around 45 states. All of the chargers are in an average 70 miles spaced and with a maximum distance of 120 miles. So all of the current EVs on the road are able to utilize the chargers, and we are providing the cross-country traveling with that, as well as more density in urban areas and in states. So for both cycles together, we are installing more than 3,500 chargers itself. Every site has CCS charter mode chargers and CCS combo and a charter mode charger on site to serve all of the vehicles. The CCS chargers are going up to 350 kilowatts, so that we can serve vehicles like the Lucid, which Eric introduced before. So good. Please to the next slide. The current state today is that we have over 423 sites commissioned since we started in 2017. We have construction completed in over 468, and out of the 800 sites which we're installing until end of 2021, we already secured 613 sites. Right now, with the COVID-19, the funnel and the move from site completed into site commissioned got a bit of a dampening, so it's a little slower there. Moving the sites over and getting them commissioned. We're happy that most of our work is seen as essential business, so we are still allowed to go to the sites and maintain the sites and then help the customers if they have to go on the road to get a charge and move forward there. So this is what we're doing today. On the next slide, some of the future focuses which we are addressing in cycle 2. Right now, we are focusing more from just installing that cross-country highway network into different mobility scenarios, so like ride-hailing, taxi, the car share and support for car share drivers. we started with an implementation with Lyft in the Denver, Colorado area, where we see that the Lyft drivers driving the Hyundai and Kia cars there, increasing the utilization of chargers dramatically. And I think this is one of the best use cases for getting people into electric cars when they're just exposed to them. Also, we're focusing this cycle on autonomous charging to pilot and then figure out what is the right way and the right product for the future to be deployed for autonomous vehicles and how can we charge them, as well as supporting bus and transit and then heavy duty that goes also into the direction what Rustam showed us before. How can we build a site, or how do we need to build a site that it's also supporting trucks and heavy duty commercial applications, and then also focusing on residential charging. So how can we get more residential chargers out in the customer's home, and then seeing how can we also deploy charging in rural areas where we maybe not have the power and where we maybe not have that many EVs, but without the charging infrastructure, also the EVs are not going to come. So how can we help there getting more EVs into rural areas? On the next slide, you're seeing one of the steps into the second cycle and the support of the heavy truck industry. The right picture there was actually a surprise for us with a blue truck there, because first we thought there was a truck driver which is actually icing our station. And so we figured out this is an electric truck, and he's there for charging testing. But also when you see the picture, the sites, since they were built for light duty vehicles, so passenger vehicles are usually not laid out to accommodate the heavy duty transport. And since we see more and more pickup there and then more and more demand, we are discussing also how these sites have to be built and designed, as well as Electrify America is supporting CharIN and the task force for the truck standard with our insights, and then working closely together with Rustam and the team to define the next EV truck standard, connector standard to support also further the combined charging system. On the next slide, we have a demo use case which we are showing right now. Can you advance to next? Yeah. With autonomous charging with a company called Stable out of the Silicon Valley, which has a pretty neat robot arm providing here the chargers and working with them. What do we need to change anything on the chargers? How can we advance for autonomous connections in the future? Building test sites with them, also together with some of the Bay Area companies to see how can we serve autonomous charging. And then on the next slide, what is coming next? I mentioned that for the rural charging, we are trying to see what are good opportunities there. We communicated not that long ago that we're investing in 30 EV ARC systems from Envision Solar, which is a solar system with an included battery, which provides power for L2 chargers. The neat thing, especially for the rural installation, is that you don't need any grid connection. It is transportable. You don't want to transport it that often, but you can certainly move it from one location to the next. and it will not fulfill the needs of charging all of the vehicles on a day-to-day basis full, but it will always help to give a charge and get the car going and get it either home to charge at home overnight, or also moving it to the next fast charging station. So providing and filling these gaps which you sometimes have in rural areas. And then also going into the design studies, which we have seen from Bob on the right hand side, working how can a fueling station model for EV looks like, so that we're moving it a bit out of these normal EV station design, but also providing canopies and then more really charging hubs. And we're looking at how this can be deployed in some sites, because we also have. Did he ask why don't I have to wait in the rain or in the sun at my gas station because I have a canopy? How can we do that? For example, also at charging. So we are trying to. We will do our first canopy design in Baker, California, which usually sees a lot of sun on the way to Las Vegas. And then my last slide, also how we are helping the power grid and how this all fits together into the connectivity with the grid. We partnered here and bought Tesla battery systems, which are helping us to do peak shaving for our chargers. So with all of that, showing kind of from just installing charging stations to how does this have to evolve in the future, and also with the strong focus on the heavy duty industry as I showed. Okay, that's it from my side. Back to you, Oleg.
Thank you very much, Cliff. Great presentation. And the next one is John.
Hi, I'm going to shift gears here a little bit and talk about transformation. What I'd like to suggest is that we know the word transformation, but it's really not continuous improvement. This first slide is I want to give a shout out to Elizabeth Fredheim, my colleague from Nikola, who used this slide at an EPRI conference recently, but I really like it. We're not talking about continuous improvement with transformation. We're talking about something radically different and ideally something much better. If we want to go to the next slide. In contemplating, can we go to the next slide, please? In contemplating transformation, I thought to talk about it in terms of three stages. Environmental change, where timing matters, and then inspiration and innovation, and then finally, focused action. This, you may be familiar with this black and white. Tony Seba has a great YouTube about transportation and energy and disruptive change. This shows when the timing's right, the circumstances are right. This is a scene from Madison Avenue, and 13 years later, completely transformed with automobiles, no horses. And on the right, I came out with a book to describe our work in smart grid starting in 2004. And we outlined all kinds of technology capabilities and so on. But really what we've seen in the utility space is more incremental and evolutionary change, given a lot of the conditions inside the utility sector. I still believe the potential for transformation lies ahead. Let's go forward to the next slide, please. So looking at environment and circumstance, I would ask the question, what impact will COVID-19 have? You know, getting ready for this, I thought about, you guys may be familiar, I thought about my world in January and February this year, where I was on a plane every week of the new year. And then everything screeched to a halt. And so clearly COVID-19 has changed things. If we go to the next slide, my suggestion would be we're really looking at two different economies, before and after. We had a lot of business as usual. I listed on the bottom some of the drivers I would consider for transformation, where we had time under a business usual scenario, and the pace of change was was incremental, where we had to accommodate different factors. And now as we move into a post-COVID world, I've actually heard it described as pandemic depression. I hope it doesn't get that far, but we have a sense of urgency to make things happen. And we can anticipate stimulus bills. More stimulus bills are under discussion, where the bias or the talk is about creating jobs. And with that, with additional capital, we have the potential to have a transformation in our sector. So maybe we can go to the next slide. And so on to the other two. When you think about the transformations you're familiar with, whether it's the smartphone or Uber or social networks, the idea is that there was some kind of inspiration and imagination, but it had to lead to be coupled with focus and action. And I would suggest that I think leveraging technology and business model innovation is where we get our direction for action. So if we go to the next slide. I would suggest that this economic urgency we will be experiencing opens the door to transformation, and that we have an opportunity to think bigger in our sector. I think the inspiration and imagination will be focused on these particular buckets of electrification, grid modernization, and climate change. And we have any number of problems and challenges that keep us from going faster. And that's where technology, where innovation will come to bear. If we go to the next slide, please. I think when we talk about collective action, we're talking as an industry of these different sectors on the left, and how we can begin to focus on ways we can imagine transformation, addressing key issues, and then the issues in technology and business model innovation on the right, to give us a menu on how we'll apply innovation to implement transformation. And so if we go to the next slide, what I'd like to suggest to you guys is that to everyone watching, can we go to the next slide, please? I think the time is right for collective focus and action, and the potential to form a coalition. I think if we get together and have a shared approach, we will do better politically. And I've already begun having several conversations about this. I'd like to encourage you all to come to my website, where I've set up a registry, tetrainnovations.net, if you find this appealing.
Thank you very much, John. And then now it is yours. And then I have a favor to ask. I know you have a lot of slides in your presentation. Please try to fit them into the time slot. Thank you.
Yeah, those are, thank you very much. And yeah, those are largely just for reference for the group afterwards. So let's go to the next slide. So EPRI, we're a nonprofit, been around for about 3 decades. We do applied research on the entire electric grid, from where it's generated to how it's used. Our group looks at electrification, big and small. Next slide, please. So next one. So globally, just kind of a quick snapshot of the market. The US is the third. Let's go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Kind of the third market. Now these numbers are distorted largely by the launch of the Tesla Model 3 in 2018, but just as kind of a reference point, you can see that the US and Europe China and Europe are ahead of the U.S. It's just because of the global industry that, you know, everything has to scale. Next slide, please. It all comes down to an individual customer making a decision. And, you know, the major stakeholders are the OEMs, the car dealers, customers. And now we have what's the question of COVID-19 and the recession. If we look at the top 25 best-selling cars in the U.S., and 70% of the cars in the U.S. that are sold are SUVs, pickups, crossovers, and that sort of thing. Only one has a plug-in option today, the Ford Fusion. I'm not sure the split between fleet and individual purchases on that, but the point is that, you know, there aren't really the alternatives today where you can go down to your dealer and get a, plug-in Ford F-150 or a, plug-in Chevy Suburban or what have you. But, optimistic about the announcements for the future. Next slide, please. So, there's about 1.5 million EVs on the road in the U.S. right now. Let's go to the next slide, please. You can see the split here between the solid black line of the fully battery electrics and the plug-in hybrids, and it's diverse across the U.S. And here's a county level snapshot of the last 12 months, or 2019, excuse me. And basically, the thing to know is black is 0% of that rolling 12 months was EV sales, and yellow is about 20%. What's interesting, and because you can see it varies county by county. And, obviously there are hot spots where, whether there's a college town or an affluent county, things like that. What's interesting to me, though, as we dig into the data on the next slide, say for Oregon, Washington, California, is you're starting to see emergence of each bar here is a different county in those three states. And you can starting to see the emergence of, call it, middle to lower income counties are also starting to increase EV sales. Now, they're not the 20% yet, but you can see that kind of the rolling average, so that's a good thing. Next slide, please. There are already 5 EVs that are launched in the States, not necessarily across all 50, but for 2020, there's some positive news, a variety of plug-in hybrids and fully electric vehicles. Next. And if you want to learn more, there's a public guide that EPRI just released last week, the consumer guide that looks at not only this year, but upcoming years. I think what's important is that chart in the upper right. So that's looking out to 2023. There'll be more than 120 EVs that have been announced by the OEMs. Now, obviously, it's going to slide with the COVID-19 reaction. What's important to me on that data is that upper blue chart piece, which is the announced plug-in SUVs and crossovers out in 2022. As you can see, there's a significant increase. Next slide, please. Let's quickly look at what was announced to be coming in the next, at least in the next 18 months. Some of these have already been announced to slide a little bit, but again, it's more in the shapes of sizes that Americans are buying. What's interesting, and again, it's just initial reports in Europe anyway. There have been a few of the OEMs that have announced plug-in hybrids. Land Rover, for example, last week, Mercedes-Benz, and a few others that announced plug-in hybrids that are coming out for Europe, not for the States, but also have DC fast charging capability, which in the States, other than the Mitsubishi Outlander, we haven't seen that yet. Next slide, please. So where to charge? This kind of gets to the heart of what we're all talking about today. And a lot of you know Mark Duval. He came up with this term in 2007. Roughly estimated 75 to 80% is at home, 15% at work, and the rest public. Now that obviously changes if you can't plug in overnight. So what we've seen for those who can plug in overnight, those percentages are roughly equal. I think it's extremely important. We all know the importance of public charging, which faces its set of challenges today. But a lot of folks in the conference today are working on those challenges, so that's a good thing. Next slide, please. So if we look at that map of North America, there's the North American utilities, including our Canadian friends, have more than $3 billion in infrastructure programs, either proposed or approved. In fact, our Canadian friends were some of the early ones. And those vary from utility to utility, whether or not they actually own the charging box or own up to it. But the point is that, this is four legs of the infrastructure stool. Tesla, there's private money, there's taxpayer money, and there's utility money going in. So, it's trying to fill in the gaps of a lot of the investment that's already gone out there. And I'm sure a lot of folks on the phone are involved in the on the policy side, arguing about where should that line be or not. Obviously, EPRI is just an observer in all this. Next slide, please. Next slide. So the grid's clean and getting cleaner, but we include this as reference in case those reports ever come up where you're like, oh, EVs are dirty. It's like, well, not really. The public charging infrastructure network are fragmented. One of the challenges right now is, and I can say this as a driver, if you drive across the country, unless you're using a Tesla or it's not networked, you just got to make sure you have the right app or key fob or what have you. But the private networks are working on an interoperability kind of standard to make it easier for drivers, which is great, as well as on the kind of pavement side. Next slide, please. So global, and this is where, again, we start to kind of get into the fleet side. We're already seeing fleets deployed. People have seen the headlines, I'm sure, about the transit buses in China, the taxis in China. I was in Europe last fall and was shocked at the amount of light duty commercial vehicles, the plumber vans, electricians vans, bakery vans, those sort of things that were running around the streets of urban cities. And most of, or I don't know, most of them, but there's a significant amount of curbside charging. So that was something that the Europeans are further ahead on than most places in the US. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So high power charging, and you know, we've already heard a lot about this. And you know, I just want to caution everyone, is like, you know, the grid trillions of dollars every year gets invested in the North American electric grid, and you know, utilities handle charging levels of all shapes and sizes. You know, I think that while there are technical concerns, it kind of depends point by point. You know, are you pulling 5 megawatts to downtown Chicago or downtown Manhattan versus 5 megawatts to, you know, a corridor along I-80 in Nebraska? You know, the high power charging won't bring down the grid. Utilities are great at providing power. The question is, and you know, kind of put on my customer hat for a minute, it's like, how long will it take for utilities to, you know, pull the power to the right spot, and what's the cost, both to the customer who requested that power as well as the percentage that gets kind of shared amongst everyone else. And that, I mean, those three things, again, there are technical challenges, but that the timing as well as the cost piece are what the utilities are largely focused on for this high power charging. Next slide, please. Next slide. Everybody's seen these. Next slide. So maybe to wrap up, so here's some stuff that the utilities have kind of learned about over the last few decades of doing this, is that, you know, we've talked about a lot of these already this morning or this afternoon. And there are plenty of reasons for individual customers, emotional reasons to drive an EV. When it comes to the commercial and industrial side, the EV has to do the job, and then it comes down to total cost of ownership. So it's very encouraging. You know, we've already seen it in transit buses. We're starting to see it in parts of those delivery vans. You know, obviously there's been big announcements here with Amazon, et cetera, and Pepsi and other kind of major fleets. But we're at the tip of, you know, what looks to be another kind of push into the EV market segment from on the commercial industrial side, which is very exciting to see. And you know, when I worked at PG&E, I worked on the customer-facing natural gas and electric vehicle side of the house. And I remember, you know, the private natural gas fueling station companies used to call, and basically their question was, hey, utility, we want to put in, or considering putting in a dozen different fueling stations, gas pipeline system. Can I quickly, you know, has a minimum of so much PSI, and it's basically like the least expensive for us to build. I think that's a lot of the questions now when it comes to, you know, these high power charging plazas. You know, do they go into existing sites, you know, retrofit? Is it a new greenfield? Is the company, you know, the private company that wants to put in the plaza or upgrade their warehouse, are they, you know, looking at 4 locations, you know, that sort of thing. So utilities, again, like, I don't want to diminish the technical challenges, but there's also a major kind of customer service, how long does it take to get an answer, you know, kind of engineering analysis that the utilities are balancing to provide the customers, big and small, the information. And with that, I think I'll stop. We can just skip just a couple more, but they're just for reference. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Dan. Really appreciate it. Very, very insightful presentation. And with that, I would like to invite all of our panelists to join back so we can go through a Q&A session. Well, broadly speaking, I have to say is that we can probably separate questions that we have received so far in 2 categories: macro questions and questions related to specific technologies. So maybe we can get a simple one related to the technology out of the way so we can focus on macro questions. So the first question from the audience was, which bidirectional technology will be most popular, AC or DC based? Anybody would like to chime in?
I can chime in. This is Bob. So, yeah, popular how? Number of units or kilowatts, right? So
the question was not specific.
Right. So the consumers, they try and keep costs low, and AC chargers are cheaper. So therefore, you'll probably sell more units there if there's a market for it, right? Meaning, is that activity being rewarded somehow or incentivized? But yeah, as far as kilowatts or kilowatt hours, it's probably going to be heavy duty DC fast.
So basically, your opinion in consumer market is probably AC, in commercial market is mostly DC.
Correct. Because of the size of the batteries and the grid connection is what it can
Anybody would
support as
like
far
to?
as flow.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, please.
I think because you'll see heavy duty vehicles financed by large companies, the market opportunity is easier to capitalize on because you can move many more kilowatt hours.
Yeah, this is Rustam. I can't join on video, but I would agree with that. On the large battery point of view, DC charging is really the only way to go if you want a fast charge.
Anybody would like to disagree?
Yeah. No, I just want to add on to that. I think it depends also strongly on the vehicle manufacturer, because I think Eric showed us that Lucid wants to use an bidirectional AC onboard charger, which adds certainly a cost to the vehicle. So there might be also other vehicle manufacturers out there which are rather focusing on DC reverse power flow. So I think we were going to see both, but I'm with Bob. It also depends on the cost for the consumer in the home. If you have a 10x more expensive DC reverse charger at home, then that might not be the breakthrough.
Thank you very much. Any other opinions?
I would just draw the distinction between fleet applications and personal vehicles. I think we'll see quicker uptake with the fleets because of the economics and the larger battery packs. And that may be AC or DC, but I think it would lean towards DC.
I see. Okay, great answers. So then let's go to a macro question. A macro question is, it's a big shark in Erica's picture. And how do we fight this big shark off? So one of the potential path forward proposed by John is a coalition. But the question has become, what kind of coalition? What this coalition should be focused on? And that's one of our questions.
I'm happy to go, but I'd rather listen to a few of the other panelists first.
Anybody welcome to start?
Yeah.
I guess I could start. I'm going to start on the last one, but I think the one thing we have to watch out for in this coalition is that we make sure that we're focusing on state policies that actually don't penalize electrification of vehicles. There's a handful of locations where there are movements to charge extra for electric vehicles because they don't know how to recognize the revenue that they're not getting from gas tax, right? So, which is not what you want to see, I think, right? Because there's plenty of regulation on the electrical side already. So,
I think it's not a simple issue. It's loaded with complexities. I'm really overwhelmed by what's happened on the oil and gas side. And I heard on the news this morning the governor of Louisiana asking for help to support the oil and gas industry. And I think we're going to see that. And we've seen projections of slow EV adoption, because I just filled up, for $1.50 a gallon the other day, and that's going to affect EV charging. But I think it behooves us to get together and start to talk about how we might put a story together from a coalition perspective about the long-term impacts of electrification and the continuing benefits, whether or not it's based on fuel costs.
I think Patty gave a very good example that actually pollution affects our ability to fight off viruses such as coronavirus, as an example. So I think this big shark is really there. And I would like to encourage all of us to brainstorm, how can we fight it off? So Erica, I know you're leading a lot of very interesting initiatives inside of SEPA focused on decarbonization and electrification. Any thoughts you would like to put on the table for us to ponder on?
Yeah, so I think that a lot of times climate change just feels really insurmountable, right? It's something that it's really large to tackle. Transportation emissions account for 25% of global GHG. We don't have like a really tangible solution yet for airline emissions. We all acknowledge the fact that our grid still isn't 100% clean, so there's a transition period for the energy coming online, and also the production of the batteries and the production of the cars, getting people to buy these really expensive cars. And there's just so many elements to getting this all right. Vehicle grid integration is one of these things that also is not guaranteed to happen. People don't buy vehicles to help the grid, right? So we have to convince consumers that this is something that they need to do, and so messaging around how they get it, they buy into the idea of even just rates, like getting people to sign up for rates actually is not that easy. So there's all these things that can feel really overwhelming, especially for me on a day-to-day basis. But I think that we have some things going for us. I think people slowly acknowledging that, yes, air quality is something we should be striving for. Yes, we need to look out for future generations and doing our part to reduce emissions. Yes, we need to be thoughtful about our purchasing decisions, and not just for vehicles, but all modes of transportation. How about I take a bike instead of driving my car today? You know, little things that people can do to contribute. And I think that it comes down to consistent messaging. And I think that's something that this industry has not really done very well. There needs to be consistent messaging between the auto OEMs, between utilities, between the state and local governments, between at a federal level and international level, because people get confused really easily. It's really hard for them to pick out what to believe. And so I think that is where we need to start.
That's a very, very, very good point. I think what you're highlighting is the fact that we're building the new ecosystem with stakeholders that have never worked together before. Utilities and OEMs have no experience of working together in the past, at least to the best of my knowledge. And I think now they have to. And the messaging has to be aligned, and the messaging has to be clear to form the thought process, policy process, to incentivize essentially the use of the electric vehicle. It's actually fascinating, and you will see during our V2G panel, demonstration shows that actually a vehicle can earn thousands of dollars per year if it's used as a grid resource. Correct me if I'm wrong, Erika, which changes total cost of ownership. But I don't think this message has been out there. I don't think people actually understand what it means. Am I wrong in saying that?
Well, there's very few places where you can actually take advantage of that monetary benefit. There are plenty of pilot programs utilities have where they're giving away free chargers to be party to that pilot or demonstration project. I mean, that's definitely worth something. But until we have, I think, we've opened up the market for aggregators, and that's not just for EV charging aggregators. This is related to all DERs. The markets need to be open so that aggregators can participate and actually pass along some of those benefits, monetary benefits to customers.
So it means
I just want to underscore what you said, Erica, about consistent messaging. And I think what's tied to that is also education. This is a very complicated industry if we just talk about the charging, right? And when we start to introduce so many other elements, we leave a lot of people behind, especially the potential for policymakers to not be on top and consider what's possible, what's a priority, and so on. So that's where I think that would be a great place to start, to pull these different sectors together and start speaking from a common playbook.
Yeah.
So it sounds to me that collaboration of multiple alliances, policymakers, governments, it's something that needs to happen in order to help this industry to move as fast as we would like it to move.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's more consistent in environment, also following up with what Erica said, because I think we have most of the bits and pieces in place. We have vehicles more and more coming. The heavy duty vehicles are coming. We have electric school buses are coming or here already. We have vehicle to grid technology. We don't have consistency in regulations. So in some states you're allowed to do it, in some states you're not allowed to do it. Sometimes you're allowed to do it at home, you're not allowed to do it at home. And also the messaging, because that helps the OEMs, the grid operators, all of them, to have a more consistent messaging to the customers. Because how do you want to explain to someone that you can't do something in California, but you cannot do it in Washington or in Nevada or whatever? So how would you then build that consistent messaging? So I think we need much more consistency.
That's a very good point. It's a very, very good point. So Dan, anything you see from every side in that direction?
Yeah, and I was just going to add, I think there's an opportunity in addition to the, the climate change and the global warming, the greenhouse gases, but the piece on the environment side that sometimes gets overlooked or downplayed is the air quality piece. The particulate matter and NOx and SOx and things like that. So human health affects all of us, especially the very young and the very old. I think that runs in parallel with the climate change, and I think it's an opportunity that we as an industry can use, and it directly ties back to electrification. And to be completely blunt, obviously generating electricity creates pollution as well, but it's the impact on human health is proportional to how close our lungs are to the exhaust pipe of the vehicle or the exhaust pipe of the power plant.
I think this is a perfect note we can finish our panel on. The impact on our health is our opportunity, and we have to basically embrace this opportunity and move forward. So I think we should continue this conversation. I would like to offer us an opportunity maybe to have another wrap-up conversation like that around maybe almost like a fireside chat opportunity after we're done with our CharIN Tuesdays as scheduled right now as a follow-on event, and continue brainstorming how we can bring multiple stakeholders together so we can actually put it in motion and implement that as actionable items.
I think that's a great idea, Oleg.
Does it sound like everybody would like to play with us?
Sounds great.
All right. Well, with that, I would like to thank you for your participation, your contribution, for your great insights. You were a fantastic panel, and I look forward to continuing this discussion. On behalf of all of us in CharIN, thank you very much for your participation. And with that, we're wrapping up. Anybody would like to say parting words? No? Okay.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, everybody.
Pleasure. Thank you very much. And with that, I would like to wrap up our first day of CharIN Tuesdays. And I see Klaus dialed back in. Klaus, you're still awake? That's great. Klaus is dialing in from Germany. And I'm delighted to say that what we have discussed today hits in the heart of the matter. We are experiencing an unprecedented change in the world. The impact of COVID-19 is immeasurable today. But I think there is also a silver lining. If we come together as humans, as professionals, we can change where this world is going. And as you saw today and heard from our panelists and keynote speakers, a lot has been done to move it in the right direction. So I'm very hopeful and optimistic that if we work together and start implementing what we discussed today as a plan that we will act upon, we will achieve a lot. So I would like to encourage you to dial into our next event next Tuesday and the Tuesday after. You will learn about what plug-in charge can bring to us as consumers, to us as business operators, to us as humans on this planet. And the Tuesday after, on the 12th, you will see what V2G technology can bring to us from both human and policy perspective and business perspective, as well as the technology perspective. So we'll dive into the technology details of both plug-in charge and V2G, and we'll also look at the implications from the business point of view. Klaus, would you like to add anything?
Oh, I enjoyed that. Thanks for professional discussions and to all the panelists and contributors. And I will be definitely at the next Tuesday in line.
I look forward to seeing you there. And I look forward to seeing everyone who dialed in today and maybe new guests who would like to participate in our next Tuesday event. With that, I would like to thank everyone. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for your contributions. And we look forward to continuing dialogue and achieving a lot together. That is the main reason we're hosting those events. Thank you very much and have a great rest of your day. Thank you. Bye-bye.